So in order to do that, I make sure that the walking is done outdoors. That might be sort of a duh, but many people get up and start moving around their house, their apartment, and they don't go anywhere. And just walking around inside, it will generate some optic flow, but nothing like the sort of optic flow that you can generate in larger environments, like out-of-doors environments. If you can't get outdoors, doing it indoors is perfectly fine, but it's not going to have the same magnitude of positive effect. Now, in order to get the alertness, I do it outdoors because I also want sunlight in my eyes. I know many of you have heard me talk about this ad nauseum on various podcasts and this podcast, but getting sunlight in your eyes first thing in the morning is absolutely vital to mental and physical health. It is perhaps the most important thing that any and all of us can and should do in order to promote metabolic well-being, promote the positive functioning of your hormone system, get your mental health steering in the right direction. There are a number of reasons for this, but before I get into those reasons, let me just emphasize what the protocol is. The protocol is get outdoors, ideally with no sunglasses if you can do that safely, even if there's cloud cover. More photons, light information, are coming through that cloud cover than would be coming from a very bright indoor bulb. So getting outdoors is absolutely key. How long should you do this? It's going to depend on the brightness of the environment. It's going to depend on a number of different factors. 2 minutes would be a minimum. 10 minutes would be even better. And if you can, 30 minutes would be fantastic. Now, if it's a very bright day or, you live in a place where there's bright sunlight, clear day on a snowfield, you would only need something like 60 seconds. But most people aren't living in those sorts of conditions. So getting outside for a 10-minute walk or a 15-minute walk will basically ensure that you're getting adequate stimulation of these neurons in the eye that are called the melanopsin intrinsically photosensitive ganglion cells. I know that's a mouthful. These are neurons that don't care about shapes of objects or the motion of objects. These are neurons that convey to the brain that it's daytime and it's time to be alert. And it sets in motion a huge number of biological cascades within every cell and organ of your body, from your liver to your gut to your heart to your brain. It really sets things down the right path. Early in the day, we experience a natural and healthy bump in a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol comes from the amygdala. That cortisol, as I mentioned, is healthy and normal and promotes wakefulness. It actually promotes a healthy immune system. So I know you've heard that stress and cortisol disrupt the immune system, but not the short little pulse of cortisol that you get each morning. It's very important that that pulse of cortisol arrive early in the day. I want to emphasize this again. It's very important that that pulse of cortisol arrive early in the day. And that pulse of cortisol is going to happen once every 24 hours, no matter what. It's going to happen, and you get to time it. How do you time it? Primarily by when you view bright sunlight or bright light of another kind. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So you want that cortisol pushed early. If you wake up before the sun comes out, it's fine to turn on artificial lights, but then you would want to get outside as soon as you can to get this natural light stimulation of your eyes. And it does have to be to your eyes. Just to really drill down into the details for a moment, you don't want to stare directly at the sun or any light that's so bright that it feels painful. If you feel like you have to close your eyes or blink, please do. You don't want to damage your retinas. The point here is to get the sunlight indirectly. It's going to essentially be scattered everywhere through the cloud cover, but from looking at a flashlight directly into that flashlight versus looking at the beam that flashlight generates on the ground, that if you're standing in the shade, you're going to get less of that sunlight than you are if you're out in an open field. So this is why the time outside it's going to need to vary depending on your particular environment. But do your best to do this every day. If you miss a day, no big deal, but try not to miss more than one day. Otherwise, your mental and physical health will start to suffer. And doing this each day costs nothing. It's just time. You can combine it with the forward ambulation, with the walk and the optic flow that I talked about before. And that's what I do each morning to generate a sense of alertness in my body and brain, to generate a sense of calm yet alert. And that's also what I do with Costello, with my bulldog. People have asked me, do these same mechanisms apply to animals? Well, the reality is many of these mechanisms were actually discovered in animals and then were tested in humans and verified that they also exist in humans. Not always. Sometimes it was the reverse, where they were tested first in humans and then brought to animals. But indeed, your dog, your horse. I don't know what other animals are out there. They need this. Now, if you have a hamster or a nocturnal animal, the reason why they like to run on their wheels at night is because they're nocturnal. They don't like being in the light. Light actually causes them to freeze, right? Actually, if you are into aquaria, you like fish, they always say, don't overfeed your fish. You'll kill the fish. That's true. But guess what? The fastest way to kill a fish is to keep the lights on 24 hours a day. They also need circadian rhythms, these 24-hour rhythms. So we'll do an entire month at some point about pet health, but meanwhile, get that morning sunlight. So now we have a first protocol, which is to write down the time of day that you wake up. The second protocol is to take a walk first thing in the morning. And the third protocol is woven in with that walk, at least for me, which is to get that sunlight exposure. Now, if you can't get sunlight exposure, you absolutely can't. I don't necessarily recommend buying one of these dawn alarm lights. And I'm sorry to say this, but they're just vastly overpriced relative to what they are. They're basically a bright LED. I instead I have a pad that's a 930 lux light pad. I think it was designed for drawing. Emulator would provide, and yet it's really bright enough, at least for me. I tend to put it on my desk while I work each morning. So here's a principle that you can leverage. If you want to be alert, view bright lights and make those lights above you. They tend to, or in front of you. If you want to go to sleep soon, or you don't want to be awake for whatever reason, try and eliminate your exposure to light. And this is not about exposure of the skin to light. This is about exposure of your eyes, of your neural retinas to light. For those of you that are concerned about blue light, I want to emphasize that blue light is precisely the wavelength of light that is optimal for stimulating these neurons in your eye, which set your circadian rhythms properly. So you don't want to shield yourself from blue light early in the day or throughout the day or anytime you want to be awake. In fact, that could have a number of detrimental consequences. Fortunately, all those consequences are going to be reversible after a short period of time of making sure that you don't wear your blue blockers during the day. Please, the time to wear blue blockers, if you do, is at night and in the evening when you're headed towards sleep. My colleague, Samar Hattar, who is head of the chronobiology unit at the National Institutes of Mental Health, has spoken about this before on my Instagram. We held an Instagram Live, and I said, Samar, what do you think about blue blockers? And he said, I don't think that's a good idea at all, unless it's really late at night and you're in a bright environment and you're trying to limit the amount of bright light that impacts the eyes. Eliminating specific wavelengths of light, in Samar's opinion, and also in my opinion, is not a natural thing for the visual system and the brain to experience. Some people get headaches while they work on the computer all day or staring at screens, and so they get blue blockers thinking that's going to protect them from their headaches. However, any protection that you get from headaches from blue blockers is going to be minimal in comparison to what's really going on there, which is that people are viewing devices and screens up close for too many hours throughout the 24-hour cycle. A better remedy would be to step away from that computer from time to time and to make sure that you can look far off into the distance, ideally a distance longer than 20 feet, like view a horizon, go out on a balcony, things of that sort, take a walk around, get into optic flow. So if you're into blue blockers, make sure you're only wearing them in the late evening and at night. I personally don't wear blue blockers at all. I prefer to just control my light viewing behavior by doing this. I do the other form of circadian control, which is to dim the lights. And I do that because dimming the lights and setting them lower in the environment sets up the brain and body for sleep much better than simply just wearing some blue blockers, And please know, if you do wear blue blockers, that if the light in your environment is bright enough, it doesn't matter if you're blocking out the blues. These cells in the eye will respond to other wavelengths of light. So I have no vendetta against the blue blockers, and I fully expect the blue blockinistas to come after me with, blue blockers. But as you do that, please understand that the biology points in the direction of get a lot of bright light throughout the day, including blue light, and at night, just limit the total amount of overall light that you're exposed to, including from screens.